Hi, I'm Marja from So Local Stitch Lounge. I'm going to show you how to make socks and shoelaces. Who knew you could sew socks and shoelaces? This is so cool. Are you ready? So the quilting cotton is for your shoelaces. That's the stuff that's not stretchy at all. And then the 2 pieces of stretchy knit jersey, those are going to be for the socks. The elastic is optional, but we'll be looking at that and how we're going to use that later. Then you also have thread, and then there's 4 aglets in a little plastic bag, and those are basically their shoelace end. And you're going to need a pair of pliers too to squeeze those together. To cut for the shoelaces, we need 2 strips that are 1 3/4 inch wide by the whole width of the fabric. So when you're cutting strips with the fabric on the fold, just make sure that your fold is squared up at the bottom, and that way when you open up your fold, you'll have a nice straight line. You're going to start by just iron them flat and then fold them in half lengthwise and iron a crease all down the length of it. So once you have the first crease, then you're going to open it up and then fold the raw edges in towards the middle crease. I just do it one side at a time, and you might press this crease flat a little bit, but we are going to be folding it again later. That center line is now your guide. You want to put your raw edge close to it, but not past it, just right up to it. Maybe leave a tiny little gap there, and that will allow it to have space when you fold it up again. Done. This is what it looks like after you've got both of those folds done. And now you're gonna start again and press that last fold close. It's basically like making bias tape. Just folding it like this. And take your time with this. It's a little bit tedious, but if you're careful with it, you'll get a really nice outcome. Okay, so we've got both of the strips folded and folded and folded and creased really nicely. And so now all we have to do is stitch down the 2 folds, and we're gonna be using a stretch stitch for that, because when you pull the laces really tight, it could snap the threads if you just used a straight stitch. So you can choose either a zigzag or a stretch stitch like a lightning stitch. There's a close-up of my lightning stitch, and it's basically a very narrow zigzag. You can see when I flip it over, it's a little bit more obvious. From the back, it looks a little bit more like a zigzag. But when I stretch that, the threads don't pop. Okay, so now it's time to put the aglets on, which is a word that I learned specifically for this project. So these little guys are called aglets, and they will go on the end. It's going to secure the end and give you something to stick through your shoelace hole. So I've got a pair of needle nose pliers, and you can use probably almost any kind of plier, but these ones were nice because I used the narrow tips to wedge the fabric down into the open aglet. And I also used an awl, and I just used this to help poke it down. Okay, so I'm going to start by folding it as small as I can on the end. I also cut off, because there were selvages on the end, and I just cut them off because it's a little bit bulkier and I want to make it as small as possible. So I'm kind of rolling it up, and I actually tried taping the end up first, but it didn't help. It just added more bulk, so got rid of that idea. And then we're just going to sort of tuck it in like that, and once it's in, you can kind of pinch it closed with just your fingers. And then we're going to start shaping it and get it even better. Tuck it in. I still see a little bit of fabric there, but that might be about as good as I can get it. I'm pretty happy with that. I don't think it's noticeable. But I'm sure this is something that you can get better at with practice. Okay, we're gonna make the socks now. All right, I'm excited. I've been wanting to make socks with jersey for so long, and I'm finally doing it. So I got this pattern from Make Bra, and I did ask for special permission to use it in the kits because it does say that it is for personal and not commercial use, but she was very happy to allow us to use this pattern in our kits. So first thing you gotta do is cut out the 2 paper pieces. Now these socks are for a size 7 to 8. So to adjust the size, you'll just cut across your pattern right here where it says adjust size here, and then the same thing on the sole piece. And then you'd either bring those 2 pieces of paper closer together or farther apart depending on if you're getting bigger or smaller. So this would be making them about 1/2 inch bigger. And then to make them smaller, you would just cut and bring them closer together. And one more thing to notice is that at the top where it says cuff, there is not any extra seam allowance for hemming. You can either leave them unhemmed for a rolled edge sock, or you can add a little cuff at the top, which I'll show you later in the video. If we do that, we should probably add a little bit of extra length to the top. I'm gonna add just a 1/2 inch. Here's my washed fabric. And I'm gonna fold both of the selvages in towards the center, and I'm gonna let those selvages overlap a little bit. Because of the way the sock pattern goes, we need a little bit bigger than folded to the halfway point. And because it was washed, those edges are just curling up like crazy. And there's not a whole lot we can do about it, but sometimes I'll unroll it and then put a pin at the edge so that it's held open a little bit better. So I've got the fold on this side and that side as well. So this way, I can place the sock on the fold like this, and there's room for the full pattern piece plus a little extra for the cuff. And to get the other piece, I'm going to flip it upside down because it's not directional fabric. And I'll put that there, and it's going to fit because I can open this up like this, but I just have to cut them one at a time. Now that I have my first sock cut out, I can change this fold. I can pull this over even more because the bigger part I need is down here, and it can be very narrow at this section here for the toe. So I can do that. And then there's lots of room here, and I still have extra here for my cuff. So now we need to transfer all the marks from the upper section of the sock onto the fabric. So I'm going to stack up my 2 socks and make all the marks. It says to do a tiny little snip into the seam allowance at each mark point, and we just have to make sure that the little snip is very small because our seam allowance is only a 1/4 inch, so if it's bigger than that, then you're going to have a hole in your sock. Now to cut out the sole, we need to have 2 folds again because we need 2 soles. So when you do your folds, you want to have the fold going along the grain line. And I know that's pretty tricky to figure out when you're looking at a solid knit because it's hard to see where the selvage is. I always look for the knit side of the fabric. You can see those tiny little lines going up and down. That's the knit side. And over here, that is the purl side. So that's the wrong side of the fabric. So if you're looking at the knit side, you want those lines to be going up and down on your fold. And if you mess this up, it's okay. Your socks are still going to be nice and stretchy and soft. So if you want to make an optional cuff at the top of your sock, you're going to cut it out like this. You're going to have 1 sole here, 1 sole right here, and we're going to take a 2-inch strip off the top straight across here. And we're going to cut that in half. So again, we need to transfer the marks from the sole to here. So we're going to just stack these up. So the narrower part is the heel and the wider part is the toe. So to make that fit, I have to flip these over. And don't forget the mark at the heel and also at the toes. So I folded the sock upper in half, matched up the back seam, pinned it, and we're gonna sew that with a stretch stitch. To sew these socks, I'm using the sewing machine and I'm gonna use stitch 4. and that is what I call the lightning stitch. It's a stretch stitch. You can also use a narrow zigzag stitch. And I put on the walking foot because that helps to bring the fabric through without stretching or warping it. It's just an easier foot to use when you're working with stretch fabric. And our seam allowance is just 1/4 of an inch. So when you're working with stretch jersey, I'm gonna start sewing not right at the edge of the fabric, but about 1/4 of an inch in. And this is to prevent the sewing machine from kind of chewing up or eating the fabric at the beginning. So I'm gonna back up to the beginning of my seam, then I'll be able to grab onto my thread and help pull the fabric through when I first start. So we're right at the beginning. See how it wants to kind of chew it up a bit? I'm gonna reach in, grab my thread, it's not very big. I made it, that's the hardest part. Now it's time to attach the soles. So make sure that you've got all your marks on the soles, and I'm gonna place them right side up. So if you look up really close, you can see the knit stitches, and that's the right side of the fabric. If you get this wrong, it's not a big deal. So we'll have the fabric right side up with the heel at the bottom. That's the narrowest part, and the wider part, which is the toe, at the top. And we'll start clipping all those notches and matching them up together, starting with the back seam that we just made. That's going to line up at the bottom of the heel. Match up the toe notches, and now you can see how the sole is quite a bit bigger than the upper part of the sock, and that's how it's supposed to be. You're going to be stretching the upper part to fit. So for now, just go around and clip those notches together, and when I sew it, I will stretch the top part to make it smooth and flat. Okay, so I've got all my marks clipped together, and as you can see, the sole is quite a bit bigger than the upper section. I'm just gonna kind of stretch it to fit like this, and I'm gonna get started away from a clip. I'm just gonna keep pulling the raw edge of the upper to match up with the raw edge of the sole. So the band is roughly 2 inches by 7 inches. I'm gonna fold it in half like that, right sides together, and I'm gonna sew. And now I'll fold this in half, and that's gonna be my little cuff piece. And we'll attach that to the top of the sock. It's very cute. Okay, so now if you decide that you wanna put the cuff on, you're gonna match up the back seams, and when you sew it, we're gonna have to make sure that it's stretched because it needs to be a very, very stretchy top edge.